Hi there, this is Dan Connolly with BaltimoreBaseball.com, and I welcome you to our third installment of Around the Beat. And we have another special guest. I say special guest every time, so I'm getting old with that. I got to figure a new terminology. But I have Sam Mellinger of the Kansas City Star, columnist of the Kansas City Star, and former Kansas City Royals beat writer. He's been around the team for years now, and give us kind of the insight as the Orioles go into Kansas City on Friday. I tell you, in switching things, Sam, one of the things that kind of bums me out is that I will not be going to Kansas City, one of my favorite places to go. And everyone's kind of shocked that it's one of my favorite road trips, but it is. And you have a very special place in my heart because you were the first person to ever introduce me to Oklahoma Joe's. So I'm glad you're here on the program, but I'm more so glad that you got me to go to Oklahoma Joe's and have the best barbecue I've ever had.
It's delicious, right? Yeah. You're welcome.
Tremendous.
I didn't realize that, but yeah. I like to spread the word.
Yeah, it was so long ago that we didn't have GPS, and you had to actually write out hand directions for me from my hotel to it. And
how old are we?
Yeah, I know. As sad and pathetic as it was, Sam, I actually held on to those directions for like 2 or 3 years in my bag, so I wouldn't have to ask you again, and I could just easily go there. So what a tremendous place. It's the best gas station I've ever eaten at, that's for sure.
Right, yeah, definitely.
So let's talk a little bit about the Kansas City Royals, and we'll go kind of with the Orioles and the Royals, a little bit of history here. 2014, both teams were upstarts. They ended up meeting in the American League Championship Series, and obviously to the distraught of the Baltimore Orioles fans, the Royals swept them in 4, went to the World Series, and lost to the San Francisco Giants. So going into 2015, it would make sense that the Orioles and the Royals were teams that people were expecting to get back there. And that really wasn't the case. And, the Orioles did take the step back, as everyone kind of had expected, or the experts had said. But the Royals went on, got to the ALCS again, beat the Blue Jays, get to the championship, the World Series, and end up beating the New York Mets, and are now world champions. So one would think, Sam, that all of us so-called experts would have the Kansas City Royals going back to the World Series for a third consecutive time, and that's not the case. A lot of people have a bunch of other teams. I have the Houston Astros. A lot of other writers have, you name it, but really not the Kansas City Royals. So why do we in the national media hate the Royals so much, Sam?
That is a question that many people in Kansas City ask, actually. Why does everybody hate us? And what's funny, though? It's not just the, kind of the national writers or national media or whatever. The computers, the projection systems despise the Royals. I think for the last 3 years, and certainly for the last 2 years when the Royals have ended up, in the playoffs and in the World Series, the most optimistic computer projection that you could ever find on them was like 83 and 79. And most of them were, 90 losses, 87 losses. And I think that, I think there's a couple things going on, and one may, sort of have to do more with the human predictions, and one may have more to do with the computer predictions. The human predictions part is they don't have, first of all, they have a terrible history, right? The Royals for so long, just been a rotten organization that loses at least 90 games every year, and so that's like part of. They don't get the benefit of the doubt. I also think that there's something to the idea that they don't have like a bankable star. They don't have. I know Lorenzo Cain finished third in the MVP voting last year, but they don't have like a superstar player. They don't have a frontline, big time stud starting pitcher. And I do think that kind of hurts them in the eyes of, humans that are trying to figure out who's going to be good. It's easy, when you think about the Angels, and the Angels aren't that good, but, they've got Mike Trout, they've got the best player in baseball. You mentioned Houston. I love Houston. But another team that a lot of people are talking about is Toronto, and they've got, you can picture Jose Bautista hitting all these home runs, Josh Donaldson and all these things. And I think that, kind of the Royals are more balanced than they are, star driven. And I think that, it's hard to, and look, like nobody, I think, like spends hours and hours and hours doing this projection. So like, it's hard. The Royals win when we're comparing like the 8th best player on the roster to somebody else's 8th best player. They win when you compare the 14th best player to somebody else's 14th best player. And it's hard for us to sort of imagine that. Now with the computers, I think the reason that the computers have so consistently and way more than humans, I think, underrated the Royals is that the Royals win in a completely different and kind of bizarre way. And, you know, Sam Miller, who does a lot of the stuff with Baseball Prospectus, talked about this, that, you know, their projections have a blind spot for the Royals. They have a blind spot for superior defense, which the Royals play. They have a blind spot for superior bullpens, which the Royals have. And, you know, that makes it hard. They have a blind spot, I think, for really good base running. The Royals run the bases really well. You know, what they don't do is hit a lot of home runs. They don't have a great starting rotation. And, you know, I think those are kind of traditionally things that you look at for baseball teams. So, you know, there's a lot going on. I do think that the humans more now than 2 years ago are high on the Royals, but I think that just the way they're built, they're always going to be a little bit underrated.
You know, I agree with you because the Orioles, again, are in the, kind of in the same boat there. And obviously, if you look at the Orioles' strengths, home run hitting is the one big thing. But if you look, you know, if you peel off the layer a little bit, I mean, you have another really, really good bullpen, perhaps not as good and dominant as the Royals, but pretty darn good. And then you have a defense which can probably rival the Royals. And you know, the Orioles, I think Pacoda had them as 73 wins this year, and you know they haven't had fewer than 81 wins under Buck going back to 2012. So they've actually had more wins than any team since 2012, and yet, you know, they're predicted as 73. And I want to kind of hit on one of the things you said, actually both things you said, but the defense, because that is, you know, we talked to Buck yesterday, and he was talking about the Toronto Blue Jays team, and he talked, you know, everyone says about the additions that they made and how good they are, but you know, a lot of those additions came with good defensive players too. I mean, they got Martin, they got Tulowitzki, they got Donaldson, who's a tremendous third baseman. So they strengthened their defense up, and Pilar, you know, kind of emerged. And I mean, when you look at this Royals team with the infield they have, and then Kane and Gordon, you know, Perez behind the plate, I mean, it is a tremendous defensive team. How much do you think that makes this team better, and how much do you think that buoys the starting pitching, which, as you said, is not very heralded?
Yeah, it's. I think it's incredibly significant. I really do. I mean, they have. If you go around the diamond, they are. I think Omar Infante is probably the one exception, but everybody else is above average or terrific defensively. You know, I mean, Gordon wins Gold Gloves. Lorenzo Cain actually hasn't won one, which I think is weird. He's probably their best defensive player. Draw Dyson just returned from a strained oblique in right field. He's super fast, covers a ton of ground, has a better arm than you think for a guy his size. Eric Hosmer's won Gold Gloves. I mean, Alcides Escobar won the Gold Glove at short. I mean, it works on so many different ways. It works, you know, like you mentioned, it helps a starting rotation. It's not terrible, but certainly isn't, you know, great. Certainly isn't, you know, it's average or below average. And that helps in a lot of ways too, like not just, you know, getting outs, but saving pitches, you know, and letting those guys work a little bit deeper into the game, which is something they desperately need. And it's there's a certain, you know, you can pick out times where they save runs, where Lorenzo Cain makes an amazing catch, where you know, Alcides Escobar made just a stupid play in Houston over the weekend, I think it was, or last week, where you know he covers 90 feet on a ball going, you know, directly behind him, and then gets. I mean, just absolutely absurd play. So you can remember those, but also what they don't do is screw up, you know, kind of the routine play, and that's hard to like pick out when you're watching a game, except for when the other team does it. And there was an example. This was the game last night where they were there were two outs, so you know keep that in mind. But still, Mike Jershler, who I think is a really good third base coach, sent Kendrick Morales to the plate on a ball where Justin Upton had the ball in left field, and I mean Morales was out by at least 10 feet and probably closer to 20 than 10. And it was a bad send by Jersh. I don't know why he did it, but he did. And the ball beat Morales by, again, at least 15 feet. And Saltalamacchia was the catcher, and just kind of took his eye off the ball, and the ball skipped over him, and Morales scored, and that was the first run, and then they ended up getting two more in the inning. That would have been the third out. And that's a play that the Royals don't screw up. That's a play that, when the Royals are in the field, that's the third out of the inning, and there's no runs given up instead of three. And, that's a play that the Royals used to screw up a lot, by the way, until the last few years. So it's more subtle. I think the defense is something that, unless you just watch the Baseball Tonight highlights or whatever, it's something that you kind of have to watch every day to appreciate and to kind of understand how much it helps. But it is an enormous part of what they do. Absolutely. There's no question about it. It's probably their biggest strength other than Wade Davis.
I'm talking here with Sam Mellinger of the Kansas City Star and co-author of The Art of Scouting with longtime Kansas City Royals scout Art Stewart. It's a great read. If you haven't checked it out, you should. But Sam, it's funny when you look at the parallels of these two teams. The Orioles starting pitching is obviously not its strength, and it's something that that kind of has been beleaguered over the last couple of years. And fans will talk to me and say they need to go out and get that ace. They need to go out and spend that money. And I make the point to them that that would be great, but those guys aren't always raising their hand to come to Camden Yards, first of all, to pitch. But
right.
Secondly, the Kansas City Royals proved last year they had the fewest amount of innings pitched by a rotation in the American League, and still won the World Series. So you don't necessarily want to go with that blueprint, and you have to have the defense, and you have to have that other stuff. But how okay does the Royals rotation have to be with guys like Volquez and Kennedy and Young and Ventura? As long as they're okay and giving you 6 innings, that's really the blueprint, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the way that they're built. They don't need if they can get their rotation just to be average, then that's awesome. You know what I mean? Like if they have an average rotation, they have a terrific team. If by the end of the year, the Royals out of 15 teams have the 7th best rotation in the American League, they're going to have the best record in the American League. I really do believe that. And there's different ways to do it, and some of this I think the Royals kind of stumbled onto, honestly, because like when Dayton Moore was hired back in 2006, he said over and over so many times that people rolled their eyes, but starting pitching is the currency of baseball, and he grew up as a baseball man with the Braves when the reason that the Braves won is because they had 3 Cy Young winners in their starting rotation, and that's kind of what Dayton wanted to build here, and it just didn't work out that way. The one really good starting pitcher that they've had over the years was Zach Greinke, who was here before Dayton was, and who they traded actually in one of the most important deals that the Royals have made. They got Lorenzo Cain and Alcides Escobar back in that trade. So, there's just too many different ways to do it to say that you have to hit home runs and have a horse at the top of your rotation to do it. The Royals have found stack up a bunch of power arms that get strikeouts in the later innings and trade power for athleticism. I don't think that the Royals have figured out the only way to win. It's baseball, probably not quite as much as other sports, but all sports I think are copycat, kind of situations. And, I think the Royals are, inspiring a lot of teams to stack up relievers. You saw a lot of teams, the Yankees come to mind probably first of, teams that signed closers when they already had closers because they're trying to, kind of emulate what the Royals have had. But this is the formula that has worked for the Royals with, so, and some of it's payroll, some of it's a lot of other things. But yeah, if they look at it, if their starting pitcher goes 6 innings and gives up 2 runs, the Royals are almost for sure going to win that game. If the starting pitcher goes 6 and gives up 3, they're going to win that game just because you're probably not going to score on them in the last 3 innings, and chances are they're going to get more than 3 runs.
Now, Dayton Moore gets a lot of credit for building this team, and it's kind of interesting to me because when I look back, Buck Showalter's a manager that's considered a very, very good manager, but at the same time, he kind of wears out his welcome, supposedly, with a reputation and that kind of thing. But he actually, I think, is the 5th or 6th longest tenured manager with his current team. And you look at some of the other guys, and you have Scioscia, and you have Bochy, and you have Girardi, and then you have Ned Yost, who was basically fired in early 2014, if I remember correctly, and since then has taken the team to the World Series twice.
Yeah.
How much of this is Ned Yost, and why have they been so successful under Ned Yost?
All right, so I believe, and I've gotten crap on this before and after Ned was accepted as a good manager, so it makes me feel like I'm right. I've always believed that Ned Yost is just terrible with strategy.
Okay.
I really do believe that, and I think that he is terrific with the clubhouse, and I think that the stuff that Ned is bad at is the stuff that's most apparent when you just watch the game. It's a lineup. It's bullpen usage before the last year or two when you started listening to Dave Island. It's things like that. What you don't see is what he's best at, which is belief and getting the guys to play hard for him and kind of these sort of corny things. I think is how it sounds. But I think when you're around that team every day, you absolutely believe it. I mean, they get along terrifically well. Some of these guys like vacation together in the off season, and you just don't see that a lot of times. I mean, they spend so much time together during the season. I think a lot of times you're sick of each other at the end of it. And so I think what Ned has done is believe in his guys, 100% and unwaveringly so, and sometimes to his own detriment. But most of the times it's paid off. And, like one of my favorite stories, and I just heard this story for the first time this spring, was I think it was the first year. So Ned was hired in May of, and now I forget exactly which year it was. I think 11 or so. But anyway, he was hired.
Actually, he was hired in 2010 because he was hired right before Buck was. That's why he gets because Buck came in 2010 with the Orioles, and Ned was already there. So he must have been that 2010 year.
I couldn't remember when they fired Tracy, who lives in infamy here in Kansas City. But,
right.
So it was later in that 2010 season, and the Orioles were bad. I mean, they just, they had guys that just weren't ready, and they were losing a lot of games. And the story goes that there was a meeting. It was David Glass, the owner, Dayton Moore, the general manager, and Ned, and they're in the office, and David Glass is just, losing it. I mean, he's pissed off, and he's angry. And at one point he says, like, I can't watch this team. This team angers me and frustrates me so much. I don't want to watch this team. And Ned, I guess, I kind of pounded his hand on the table and he said, you know what? Then don't watch. Then don't watch. If watching this team gives you that much heartburn, then I don't want you to watch. But just know that it's going to get better. And it was a little bit of a confrontation between a manager that they just hired and the owner who signs the checks, and Dayton was in there, and he kind of says, like, the whole thing's like, woo, you just talk back to the owner. But David Glass kind of, okay, like, let's see. And I guess that's sort of the belief that he's always had. He's willing to, talk back to the owner. He's willing to, stick with Alcides Escobar at the plate when nobody thinks he should, and Mike Moustakas put him in the 2-hole when everybody thinks that's idiotic. And, all these things because he believes in his guys, and it's always paid off. And that's way more important than, some of the strategy things, which, by the way, it's also fair to say has been so close to backfire. I mean, the Yordano Ventura thing in the 6th inning of the wild card game, they almost blew that game because of that. And, burning Wade Davis, in Game 6 or not, didn't end up burning him, but pitching Wade Davis before what you think is going to be an hour-long rain delay when you don't think you'll have him on the other side of the rain delay. I mean, there's been strategic mistakes that he's made that he's been able to get out of, but he's been so good in the clubhouse, so good, with those guys that it kind of covers up a lot of other weaknesses.
We're talking here on BaltimoreBaseball.com with Sam Mellinger, the sports columnist for Kansas City Star, and it's funny, we're talking about mistakes and sticking with your guys. And one of the things we've seen with World Series teams is sometimes they fall in love with their own players and they give them money contracts that maybe they shouldn't have or maybe are emotionally tied to, and then they don't pan out. There were a couple key guys or guys that came in that were basically rentals for the Royals this past year in Zobrist, in Cueto. But the Royals decided to give a 4-year, $72 million deal to Alex Gordon, who, you wonder if he really truly is an $18 million guy based on, his stats and that kind of stuff. But how important was it to lock up Alex Gordon as far as the Royals organization is concerned. And, he started out slow. Is that just the first couple of weeks of the season, or do you think that there's maybe he's put a little extra pressure on himself? I mean, we all remember when he came up and he was, supposed to be the next whomever, and it took him a while to get to that point.
You say the next whomever. He was the next George Brett.
Right.
And it was because, at the time he played third base. He had the sandy blonde hair, hit left-handed, all that stuff, and which I was the dumbest thing in the world. And I was in my mind, I was like, I'm never going to write that stupid thing that he's the next George Brett until George Brett said, I'm honored by the comparison because he's better than I was at that age. I'm like, wow. That is, who has more pressure than that, right? But
right.
So anyway, about that contract, they had to do it. At that money, they had to do it. I think what they were convinced that they were going to lose him in the offseason. They thought that he was going to, somebody was going to blow them out of the water and, give him a $100 million plus contract. And they got lucky in a lot of ways. Jason Hayward going from the Cardinals to the Cubs worked in their favor on a few different levels. But I think that it was important because on a team that is super emotional, this team, bat flips and they talk and they dump Gatorade on each other after, a 5-2 win in April. They're a really, really emotional group. And most of the time that's really good. They play with passion, they play with energy, all those things. But, the more you talk to guys around that team, the more they say that they need Alex Gordon's influence. He's like the one, kind of steady guy on a team full of sort of up and down emotional guys. He also, look, like a lot of this is sort of, intangible, but, he's the hardest worker on the team, and it's not even close. And that's not to say that there aren't hard workers on the team. He's just a ridiculously obsessive worker. And I think that that's a good influence. I think that it's a good thing to retain your own players, especially the ones that want to be there. He's also a really good baseball player. He's a terrific defensive player. His numbers, he's probably had his best career offensive year, but he's still, a 120 OPS plus kind of guy. And, he is off to a terrible start. But the one thing that I would say about that is 3 of the last 4 years, he's gotten off to a really terrible start. And each of those years, his numbers at the end of the year have been really good. And, maybe not his counting numbers last year, but that's because he missed, 2.5, 3 months with the groin injury. But I don't think that the Royals regret that contract at all. I think they were surprised that they were able to get Alex at that price. There were a lot of people, both in the clubhouse and in the front office that were kind of almost resigned to the idea that he was going to go somewhere else for more money than the Royals could spend. So, I think, emotionally, spiritually, and, just like tangible baseball production, I think that, that was a really important deal for them to get done.
It's kind of interesting because in parallels with the Orioles, you think about Nick Markakis not signing Markakis to a 4-year, $40 million deal. And, and then they took a step backwards last year. They obviously didn't sign Nelson Cruz either, but Markakis was kind of the Gordon of the Orioles. So it's kind of an interesting comparison. So
it's funny you say that. I'm sorry to interrupt real quick, but like the Markakis thing, I think there's a lot of similarities in those guys because I know that the Royals front office adores Nick Markakis. They love the way that guy plays and the way that, he carries himself and all that. So I think there are a lot of similarities there, but I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, absolutely. And again, we're talking to Sam Mellinger with the Kansas City Star. And now that we've talked about the Royals for a while, but I do got to push it a little bit over to the Orioles, especially from someone kind of looking from afar. I mean, this team was 81-81 last year. They started out hot at the beginning of this year, winning their first 7. They have one of the best managers in baseball, and I don't think that's just a bias thing. He really is that good. And they have a very good bullpen, and they can absolutely, positively smash baseballs into souvenirs. So my question is, sitting from afar and watching this team and you'll be seeing them this weekend, what do you see in these Baltimore Orioles, and what do you expect of these Baltimore Orioles, especially in the American League East?
Yeah, I think the AL East, there's never been a year, I shouldn't say never, but there hasn't been a year in the last 5 years, I don't think, where I've felt like I have a real good handle on what that division is going to be. It just seems like, that they're all unpredictable, but it seems to me like the AL East is more unpredictable than most. And I don't know. I love their lineup. Manny Machado is one of my favorite players in baseball. And I absolutely love the guy's skill. I love how he plays. I love that he defends and he hits. They've got a lot of power, and just like we were talking about, the Royals. One thing I guess I didn't mention with how much they focused on defense and athleticism. A lot of that is sort of a nod at their ballpark. They have this huge outfield. They have to cover ground. They need those athletes to do that. And in a similar way, if you're playing at Camden Yards, which I know you guys hear this all the time, is one of those beautiful favorite baseball stadiums, in the league. It's also short, right? It's the 368 in the alleys, and they've built a lot of power. And I think that if you're a pitcher and you're going in there, and you see Chris Davis and Machado and Trumbo, I know he strikes out a lot, but can hit the ball a long ways. A lot of these guys that can hit a lot of home runs. I mean, that is a dangerous thing. So, I know, just like with the Royals, Ian Kennedy maybe gives them the benefit of the doubt, although $70 million probably gives more of the benefit of the doubt. But, it's attractive for pitchers to go pitch at Kauffman Stadium. And like you were saying earlier, it's not attractive for pitchers to go to Camden Yards. But, if they can get that bullpen where they need it, then, yeah, I mean, I don't know why. I know everybody's on Toronto, and I think the reasons for that are obvious. But Baltimore's got a really good team. I don't think anybody should be surprised if they're right there at the end of it.
I agree with you. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how far your team goes, because the Royals seem to be built not only for 162, but for those little things that need to be done in the playoffs. And that's maybe one criticism with the Orioles in the last few years. They haven't been able to do those little things. We go back to Game 4 of the 2014 ALCS, where the Royals scored 2 runs in the first inning on a grounder to first base that Pierce tried to go home with, and it was just one of those, it was a bang play, got past the catcher, and they scored 2 runs. Flaherty hit the solo homer, and that's all they can do, and they lose 2-1. So I mean, and that's kind of the way the Royals kind of were built, to do those little things and take advantage of the mistakes. And the Orioles, because they haven't had much on base percentage, have been pretty low towards the bottom of the American League most years in the last, say, 4 or 5. That's something that's kind of a concern. But if they can do that, if they can improve on that, if some of the guys that they've added can really help, they should be a good team too. So we may be able to get together in October again. Who knows?
That'd be fun. I'll take you to Oklahoma Joe.
And we get to go to Oklahoma Joe. See, we came all the way. That's what good writers are. We start at something, we come all the way around. So I want to thank my guest here on BaltimoreBaseball.com and Around the Beat, Sam Mellinger of the Kansas City Star. It's a great newspaper. He's a great columnist. Check out his book as well with Art Stewart, The Art of Scouting. And Sam, thanks again, man, for coming on with me.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, Dan. Anytime.